Out of Shasta College. How's everything going? I think everything's working here at my end. Now the camera seems to be pixelating. Oh, the technology issues, but I think the sound's working, so this is getting to you. Uh, Talk about literature this week for the rest of the week. I know you're working on your papers. Please do so. Please make them meaningful, not just biographical information, but why those writers I ask you to write about, or you choose one, why they matter, and why does literature matter? It matters maybe more than ever because very few people are reading anymore. An entire generation of people are essentially reading everything off their cell phones. They've put the book down, which is a shame because the book is a rare art form that has produced hours and hours and hours and months of knowledge through literature, through fiction writing. And I want to talk about fiction a little bit about when people think it's fiction, they don't think it's the truth, which is ridiculous because the truth comes, there's more truth in fiction than there is in real life stories or something, because fiction is real life. It might be a made up scenario, but the characters are real if it's good writing, and the themes are there if it's good writing. The truth is there. You can dig for the truth in fiction like you can't dig in a nonfiction book because the fiction book, you can make it, you could create a world. You play God when you write a fiction book. When you're writing the truth or so called nonfiction, you have to stick to the story. You can't supposedly make things up to make it more entertaining, but that has happened in fiction books. If you ever read any nonfiction or memoirs, they read more and more like novels every day because people, that's what people want to, they think that's what they want as readers. And so they do um, enhance the actual reality of what really happened. How do I know? Well, go read anything that Norman Mailer wrote in Executioner's Song. He has entire conversations back and forth with characters. He would never know about that. He was never talked. The character people he interviewed didn't tell them those stories. He made that up, and it made it very readable. It better read like a nonfiction novel. Was that cheating? Yeah, he got a story out there. It's a brilliant book. Same with Truman Capote when he wrote In Cold Blood, and Joan Didion when she writes her brilliant books. They read as good as novels if they're good writers. Um, I didn't get a chance much to speak about the World War II writers coming out of World War II, how it was probably the height of our reading age coming out of that era. Because, well, first of all, we had a lot of wannabe writers who got drafted into the war. A lot of them got killed, folks. And the ones that didn't wrote some great novels, like Jim Jones's From Here to Eternity or Thin Red Line or Norman Mailer's Army of the Dead, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse Five, Catch 22. So many great novels came out of World War II by Joseph Heller, by the way. And these guys all were in the army. Vonnegut was an actual prisoner of war, and he wrote about it in a very beautiful, funny way. Yes, you could write a funny World War II novel. Catch 22 is hilariously brilliant, and through humor, the truth of the reality goes down easier. You can swallow that bitter pill through humor. These guys were highly educated. They were writing in their journals in the battlefield and hopes that they could come out and get published, and they did. In the 1950s, when the Cold War was on with Soviet Union and rock and roll was just beginning, there was a new breed of writers called the Beat Generation, led by Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. who was starting to write about books about people who were disenfranchised from the world around us. They weren't fitting back into society after World War II. They had been to the war, they'd seen some horrors of the war, and they couldn't be expected to go back to their old lives of being store clerks or auto mechanics and getting married and having the perfect family. They wanted something else. This is before we had post traumatic stress syndrome. We didn't know what it was called. They called it shell shock in those days, or battle fatigue. That was another word for it. And they had nightmares and dreams about this stuff for years and years because before we went to psychiatrists or had medication to help us with these things. And so these writers wrote. They wrote their story, and their passion for the world around them comes through their words. On the Road of Jack Kerouac, which didn't get published when it first was written, it took him a couple years to get it published. It was a revolutionary novel because it was about a disenfranchised man who did not fit into the normal scheme of things after the war, and the politics and the Cold War, and everybody behaving themselves. If all you have to do is look at TV from the 50s, Leave It to Beaver, Donna Reed show, I Love Lucy. It's a very bunch of well-behaved people. They aren't pushing the outs. They're not outsiders for real. That came around when Elvis Presley started singing rock and roll, and the outsiders became to forefront. And of course, we saw what happened in the 60s with the outsiders in rock and roll, starting with the Beatles and the Stones and Jimi Hendrix and Cream and Janis Joplin and Jefferson Airplane. The outsiders, for a brief moment, ruled the music charts, festival charts. But these writers from the 50s inspired these rock and rollers from the 60s because with their prose, with the words they were saying, that a lot of it was free form, sort of jazz like poetry. It wasn't boring and pedantic like so many of the authors from the 19th century, which we've all tried to read. You have to really get into their mindset to understand it, to dig it. Um, but by now, the hipsters are starting to write in a language the readers got. They understood the language because the people writing it understood the language. It had changed. And people like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and Kurt Vonnegut understood that very well. There were still some traditional writers who were successful in this era. John Steinbeck would be one of them, who was never not necessarily a World War II writer. He was writing before that, Grapes of Wrath, one of the greatest novels ever written. East of Eden, same thing. Travels with Charlie. And he was in the mode of almost early 20th century writers who were writing in a more traditional way, and not this free form rebellious way. Um, and then there was some female writers out there, like Flannery O'Connor was writing um, some incredible Southern Gothic fiction. She didn't like that term, but it was. She's one of my favorite all-time writers. If you ever want to read a great novel, I mean it. If we're in class, I'd assign it. It would be called Wise Blood, a short novel about a guy who's coming back from the war, and he's going to start a of Church of Jesus Christ without Jesus. He came back. He went into the army a Christian. He came out an atheist. It's a brutal, brutal, funny, terrifying novel of somebody who's lost their faith in Christianity, but trying to gain a new kind of faith. And it was made into a great movie by John Huston in the 80s, one of John Huston's last movies. Anyway, so there are women writers out there who are writing in this new style. They are never as popular as the guys because they never had a chance. Just like female artists didn't have the chance that men had. Same thing with music. Hopefully that's changing now. Anyway, so we have these writers from different areas of the country, and their voice reflected that area of the country. There's Western writers like Jim Harrison, and I would say Richard Ford would be in there. John Steinbeck was writing about California. Um, Joan Didion spent a lot of time writing about Southern California. Um, and they have a cadence to their voice, their writing voice, that puts them in a certain section of the country. Um, there are East Coast writers like Saul Bellows and Philip Roth who sound like the East Coast in their writing and their perceptions, and so they're they're kind of clumped into the regional writers. Writing for a region because you live there or born and raised there is something to be proud of because you cannot take the person out of the region. Yeah, you could go move to Florida or New York City and become a New Yorker, but your roots are in some small town in Illinois, maybe. And so that voice is really important to try to hold on to and maintain and use in your art as a fiction writer. Um, there was a time in this country where reading was hip. People carried pocketbooks. That's when the pocketbook started. So you could put it in your pocket and walk around. You didn't have this big cumbersome hardbound book. You had a small pocketbook. And in the 50s was a huge boon in these pocketbooks. You could buy them for as little as 10 cents in local drugstores. They didn't have 7-Elevens in those days, but they had little corner markets. I would carry these airports. You could grab a pocketbook and paperback, they used to call them, because it was the cheaply made, very you could travel with them anywhere because you could stick them in your pocket. So you traveled, you hitchhiked with them, you went to Europe with them, reading books. Every time I went to Europe, 3 times so far, I always took a book with me, a paperback, because you could really. It's another reading experience when you're reading in Amsterdam or Paris than it is when you're reading in your hometown. The whole environment is different. So reading was considered very hip. And so everybody's going to college on the GI Bill at a World War II. And for the first time in this country, it was paid for. Um, and so there's thousands and thousands of men and women are getting college educated and they're reading novels. They're reading Jack London, John Steinbeck, Jack Kerouac, all these writers I've been mentioning. Everybody's reading the same books and they're talking about them in coffee shops and bars because everybody's reading the same book and people want to share what they're reading. Maybe you belong to a book club. Do you really? Um, when the 60s came along, it was considered a hip thing, a cool thing if you were well read. If you'd read the classics, Dickens and Chekhov and the classic playwrights from Tennessee Williams to Arthur Miller, you were considered well-rounded individual. It was a thing of um, a collective acceptance into the world around you to have read the same books, seen the same movies, listened to the same music. It still goes to this day, except for now with so much of it coming out of every social media, it's hard to focus on any one. We still only have Elvis. We used to only have the Rolling Stones. We only had one Kurt Vonnegut book. Now there's 50,000 bands, 40,000 movies. It's hard to focus on any one anymore. There's almost too much of a glut of it. We're a very disposable country. We go through things like, and we get bored with it, we put it aside. Um, in the 1960s, filmmakers have started to make films and they set them on college campuses. The Strawberry Statement, Getting Straight, The Graduate, and it looked like a real cool thing to do, go to college. Um, start reading, learn stuff, be smart, talk, um, be in love. That's kind of gone by the wayside right now. Colleges are in trouble, as you well know that. Maybe they cost way too much money. Um, Now AI is going to take over everything and do everybody's papers for you. So I don't know where it's going to go. We don't know. It's a mystery, and but there's fun in that mystery. Mystery doesn't need to necessarily be a stopping block or a door shutting in our face. We find another way to get through that door. Anyway, um, I'll keep this short. I'll talk to you guys again on Wednesday about literature and the importance of it and why it matters. So please, when you're writing your paper, when you're writing about, I don't know who I signed, I have to go look, but I think I signed um, some very interesting writers. They changed everything in the culture. They actually changed the culture because everybody was reading these books. That's how profound they were. I'm going to leave you with one quote by the great writer Flannery O'Connor, who was a female, by the way. She died early, 1963, of lupus. She didn't make 40, but she wrote half a dozen of the most wonderful books ever written. Um, she used to teach writing at the Iowa Workshop, um, and she used to tell people when people go, "Well, I don't understand. How come we're not solving problems? How come we're not coming up with answers? How come at the end of the book, I still don't know what the answer is?" And then she said, and it's brilliant. She says, as writers, you might as well say artists across the board, filmmakers, painters, dancers, all of it, composers, as artists, it's not our job to solve the mystery. It's our job to deepen the mystery. See you next time.